What's good, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the ending of What If Deku Was Gohan's Reincarnation. If you guys want to enjoy the entirety of this series, then I'd really appreciate it a lot if you guys were to go show the movie version of this a lot of support when it comes out. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Immediately after this, Izuku looks up as he just stares at the crowd and hears all of this cheering. Immediately he gets into this flashback where he begins to essentially see visions of when he was told he was quirkless and felt at his absolute lowest. Izuku opens his eyes once more and just sees the cheering people and smiling faces at the thought of him winning. And Izuku just smiles, not being able to help the fact that he's happy. He's content with his life. Izuku feels fulfilled. It's a great time for Izuku overall. And after this, we essentially end up jumping back into classroom where Izuku walks inside and Kaminari goes up to Deku and says, "Dude, your performance at the USJ, it was awesome. Seriously, I can't tell you enough how cool you look tapping into that strange power you have." Deku looks at Kaminari and tells him, thank you for that, and goes on to essentially look at his classmates as they all they're like, "Congrats, Izuku." Even Bakugo comes next to him and, punches him in the arm and goes, "Yeah, you did good, loser." And suddenly, from here, he goes towards his desk, sits down, and Deku just pretty much goes towards the front of the classroom, letting All Might walk in and pretty much explain to them that pretty soon they're actually going to be having to pick their hero names and picking their very first intern experience with a real pro hero, giving them all a list to check before pretty much explaining to them that they all have about 24 hours to pick and that they have about 20 minutes to pick their hero names. Deku just looks at All Might and says, "We have 20 minutes as high school kids to pick the hero name that will follow us for the rest of our lives." All Might's like, "Yeah, I picked All Might when I was around your age, kid, so don't stress too bad. I mean, most of the time your name that you pick is pretty cool, so don't worry about it." Midnight walks in and she looks towards the direction of Deku and she winks at him, and Deku's just like, he smiles, and she suddenly begins to essentially like go through everybody, pretty much explaining their names, being like, "I like it, I don't like it, try again," you know what I mean? Eventually everybody ends up picking their hero names, and we basically have Deku pick his hero name, which is essentially just going to be the pro hero Kami. No, I can't call him Kami, even though it sounds cool. Gohan, why not? Let's just call him Gohan. Pro hero Gohan or something. I don't know. Just make up some cool name, all right? He basically makes up this really cool hero name, and following these little events that end up happening, all of them go on their internships. Now, obviously, we end up having a bit of a situation where Deku doesn't really know where he should internship. So he ends up pretty much going over to Nezu's office after all was said and done, and pretty much explaining to him that he'd rather intern with the Supreme Kais than with a regular superhero, saying that they are the guardians of the universe and that their training will be much more sufficient than the training of any pro hero here. Nezu looks at Izuku, drinks his tea, and says, "Ah, yes, Izuku, go ahead. I understand that you're already much stronger than anybody here, so the only thing you would really learn is experience. You could learn that later on when you're closer to graduating, so I understand. For this time, you can go train with whoever it is you said. Supreme Kais, right?" Izuku looks back at Nezu and is like, "Right, sir." And Nezu just goes, yeah, look at my fur. It's so soft, right?" Izuku looks back at Nezu and he's like, "Thanks, sir." And suddenly Nezu tells him to stop before pretty much telling him that essentially he needs to, live up to the expectations of the teachers. Izuku nods his head, thinks to himself, "What a cool guy," and suddenly walks away from Nezu's office. He then immediately walks back towards the class, and he goes on to pretty much grab his things before then looking to all of them and holding out a peace sign and saying, bye guys, before saying kai kai and going straight to the world of the Kais, where he essentially begins to train for about an entire week. Now obviously the successor of All Might is the one who goes off into the Hostu City incident, and I'm not even going to sugarcoat this. Ida still goes over there and gets very much hurt by Stain. He pretty much gets paralyzed, and since this random kid isn't the best friend of Ida like Deku is, he pretty much ends up actually getting pretty much paralyzed, never being able to become a hero again. But luckily this new kid with the OC power and like One For All is able to jump in and save Ida just in time before he could get killed, and then defeat Stain, because now he has like 20% of full cowling, which even Canon Izuku was able to put a good fight up against, and he only had about 5%. So now just imagine 20% full cowling this random OC kid, right? Anyways though, regardless of that said fact, we're now going to be jumping into another situation that's going to be landing Izuku a bit closer to home. Now, Izuku would pre at the planet of the Kais when suddenly the Kais would essentially begin to get worried. They're looking through a crystal ball and notice that there's a threat in the universe, some strange being who's pretty much going around conquering planets and essentially not being very nice, right? So Izuku just uses his instant transmission ability, and the Kais tell him that this is going to be his first real mission. He immediately instant transmissions there, and once he does arrive, this being looks towards Izuku and tells him to get lost unless he wants to end like the rest of them. Suddenly, we then have Izuku looking towards this direction of like an ancestor, or like a not an ancestor, but like the next generation of the what was his name? Frieza, like the Frieza of Universe 6, right? Like the next generation of him. And Izuku looks to this man, and it's like he doesn't have the final form also, since, you know, they're weaker. And we basically have Izuku like looking at this dude, this tyrant, and essentially just looking at him and telling him that he better stop or he's gonna have to put an end to this. He tells him that he's funny for that before immediately lunging in and, you know, screaming, using his ki to essentially try to kill him in one fell swoop. But Izuku's able to easily dodge and get out of the way easily with finesse like no other. Eventually, Izuku taps into his mystic form and begins to absolutely begin berating this man with punches, kicks, and ki blasts that are able to pretty much hold the other dude at bay. Suddenly, he taps into his final form, and Izuku and this unknown individual known as Ice Cube. I'm just kidding. Not Ice Cube, but Frozone or something like that. But like something like that, right? And like this dude just looks towards the direction of Deku, and they both begin just fighting and throwing hands. And Deku's actually getting pushed back. This dude is incredibly powerful, but Deku through this fight is actually learning as he goes. He's improving, and his anger is rising to the surface as he begins to be told about all the horrible things that this dude was actually doing to this planet and the planets beforehand. Izuku looks towards the direction of him and tells him that all that ends now, and that he's gonna be making sure that he never harms anybody ever again. You know, he screams, and suddenly he lunges up into the air before yelling Masenko, you know, shooting a giant energy blast at the direction of this being and pretty much eradicating him from existence, giving Deku a bit of a huge increase in his power, and also obliterating the villain tyrannical person that was in the universe just causing problems. Izuku Kakkai's back, noticing that he's pretty much late for school with his watch that he has on his wrist, and once he arrives, he gets to pretty much be told of Ida's death. Not only that, but also about how All Might is going to actually be holding like these final like races and final exams. Now when it comes to the race, they all do relatively easy. Deku wins, but when it comes to the finals, the written portion would be extremely incredibly easy for Izuku, because I mean Izuku's pretty much learning knowledge of the actual universe, and he's a generally smart kid in general, plus he also has Gohan's intelligence stacked on top, so it's like pretty OP when it comes to how smart Izuku actually is. And then when it comes to his physical fight against All Might, I don't really think I need to tell you guys too much about this. We obviously saw a original fight between All Might in the second installment of this series, so I'm basically going to be saying that instead of having them both fight and, you know, just letting Izuku stomp All Might, instead of that, I'm actually going to be having it to where Izuku pretty much just ends up catching All Might off guard, and just grabbing his partner, using Kai to make his way towards the finish line and walk right past it, beating All Might, who kind of knew he was going to lose, but he laughs and says he was careless. The class believes him, and Izuku goes on to pretty much enjoy the fruits of his labor, which is essentially being allowed into the forest training camp. Once they're all on the bus and they're all excited to make their way towards said training camp, all of them get there and suddenly Mandalay shoots them off the mountain, leading to Deku looking at all of them and saying that he doesn't really feel like walking through this mosquito infested forest, looking at them and asking if they feel like it. They would all nod aggressively, being like, not really. And Deku says, I thought so, before putting his hand on his forehead and saying, Kai, immediately making their way towards the direction of the actual tower area, and then telling them all to just relax until the actual teachers arrive, which was about 2 hours later on the bus. Once that happened, all of them were pretty much passed out sleeping, resting, and when Aizawa was pretty much like made his way outside, he began waiting for the class, just being like, okay, it's been 3 hours. It's been 4 hours. It's been 5 hours. And suddenly he's like, where are these kids? He goes in to the forest to look for them and they're nowhere to be seen. He begins to get really worried and everyone's just sleeping. And suddenly, Mandalay goes into one of the rooms to grab her coat or something like that. Or to just check if the kids are there. She sees that all of them are just knocked out on the bed sleeping, and she immediately loses her cool and just uses her quirk on the students, making them all get afraid and jump up. And Aizawa was then immediately told the situation, leading to Aizawa actually scowling at Deku and telling him that they were supposed to do this on their own, saying he knows Izuku could have, but because he decided to do that, he's now going to get punished. So Izuku's now on punishment, and the rest of the class has to do it all over again in the nighttime, so it was a lot harder for them, but they managed, right? That being said, what pretty much ended up happening following this small situation is essentially we end up having the point in time in which Koda pretty much just ends up helping the girls from Mineta by not letting them peek, pass out. Izuku catches them. He learns about Koda's backstory. And once he does learn about Koda's backstory, I see Izuku still being sympathetic. So nothing's really going to be changing until the muscular encounter, which is what I'm going to be jumping to. Izuku would sit down right next to Koda, going on to explain to him that he knows that it must be hard to not have his parents around, but telling him that he should be grateful that he has an aunt that really cares about him and, having a home, having a quirk, to count his blessings. Koda looks at him and tells him that what would he know about these things, saying that he's just some stuck-up pro hero like everyone else, that he's just gonna die someday anyways, just like his parents did, and that there's no reason for any of them to be here, that heroes are just a waste of time. Izuku looks towards Koda and is about to say something when suddenly Muscular reveals himself and is like, hey, I'm looking for Akatsuki Bakugo. Deku holds one hand towards the direction of Muscular as Koda turns around and just blasts him straight off the cliff, leading him to get completely knocked out. And Deku continues talking to Koda, telling him not to worry about that, as Koda just looks at Deku in shock, and Deku looks at him and tells him that he's been there before, in a point in time where he felt weak, useless. He felt as if the whole world was against him, back before he could finally control his quirk, and he thought he was quirkless for a while, telling Koda not to pretty much think about the bad, but only the good, and telling Koda that there is maybe going to be an opportunity someday where Koda will actually get the chance to, see things in a brighter light, saying that he's young, but someday he'll understand what he means. Suddenly, Izuku realizes that there's a bunch of key signatures, malicious ones, that he doesn't recognize, so he just uses the Kai to teleport to each one and pretty much dismantle them all individually. Moonfish, Muscular, pretty much Mr. Compress, Dabi, Spinner, all of those characters pretty much get mollywopped by Deku. Just imagine if Goku was in the Dragon Ball Z universe and just begun to, okay, let me instant transmission to this villain. Boop, I punched you once in the face, you're knocked out. Boop, 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 boop. That's pretty much what Deku did to all of these villains. And he did it so fast that once he ended up pretty much grabbing them all and wrapping them up in their restraints, Izuku was just like, all right, so what do we do now? All Might looks to Izuku and tells him that that was some efficient work. And Koda arrives only to see Deku had pretty much handled all those villains and is shocked at how powerful he is, starting to kind of look up to Deku and also realizing that one of those villains was the one who killed his parents. He looks to Deku and pretty much tells him thank you, that that's the guy that killed his parents. Deku gets a bit angry after hearing that, knowing that Muscular did something like that, but just says that he'll get what's coming to him in Tartarus, asking Koda if he wants to pay him back a little bit. Koda smiles and shoots a water beam at the direction of Muscular's other good eye, and he messes it up permanently, not blinding him, but, kind of blurring his vision. And, now Koda's happy, and, he and Deku are on good terms now. And suddenly, now we just POV change to the direction of the police taking in all of the villains, when suddenly All For One appears and essentially begins to dismantle them all, killing them in essence, and taking all those villains that were pretty much held captive away, only to pretty much reveal them sometime later on. Deku is none the wiser of the situation, so school continues just like usual, and eventually they make their way towards the, the provisional license exam. Now I'm gonna keep it a buck with you guys. I hate this arc. I hate it so much. It's so boring. The stakes are so low. It doesn't matter. Deku's gonna win anyways. You all know that. So we're just gonna skip there, and then we're just gonna go straight to the internship arc with Mirio, right? The Mirio arc is going to be slightly boring, and when I say slightly, I'm sorry, guys. I mean very boring. I mean, obviously we have Mirio, this dope Giga Chad character who at the beginning was honestly super cool, but Horikoshi just mishandled him, I believe. So we're really just gonna have Deku curb stomp Mirio at the beginning, and then once he offers the internship with Tsunade, Izuku does accept, just because Mirio's so enthusiastic, and Izuku can tell that Mirio probably does want him to go. So Izuku, out of the kindness of his heart, ends up accepting Mirio's offer and pretty much telling him that he will happily go and, do what he was pretty much asked by Mirio. Izuku then goes on to pretty much just go in there, and when they run into Eri in the alleyway, Izuku knows that Overhaul's intentions aren't pure. So what does Izuku do? Izuku puts one hand on Overhaul and pretty much Kai's him into a random planet, telling him that jail is not good enough for somebody like him who dares hurt a little girl for research. As he says, "You're not Jiraiya, bro. Calm down." He then leaves, and Overhaul is just stranded on this planet. And we're just going to be saying that it's a planet similar to Vampa, and that Overhaul dies literally 2 days after because he has no water and he has to fight against these giant beasts. And it's just funny. But what ends up happening following this situation is we essentially just have this moment where Izuku is kind of just going through everything so easily that there's really no point in pointing any of that stuff out. Eventually, though, we make it to the point where about 4 years would pass, and this is when the villain that I brought up in the second episode is actually going to pop back into existence. The villain known as like a random Majin creature, right? He finally wakes up from his slumber and is awoken by another magical wizard, right? And we basically have this moment where Izuku's now currently a pro hero, and he's been doing his thing for a couple of years now. He's been performing great in the hero society, and Deku has just been doing his thing, going toe to toe with some of the strongest villains in the world, every single day. But even they are not able to put a fight up. Essentially, Izuku goes from the planet of the Kais to his home to work every single day, and that's the cycle. He's been training for years, and yes, eventually he did end up meeting Champa, which was actually a pretty funny encounter, because when Champa found out that they had an apprentice Supreme Kai, he was actually quite shocked, saying that he reminds him a lot of this one Saiyan from Universe 7. Izuku asks if it was Gohan, and Champa says something like that. He then asks him to go train on the planet of, the Destroyer, and Izuku goes over there and actually ends up mastering God Ki, which is actually extremely impressive. And because he's able to actually manage to learn God Ki, he's able to actually stack Mystic Form on top of God Ki, making this strange, what does white and red create? It creates pink, making this strange, pink God form that Izuku now has complete full access to. Because of his Mystic Form being something easily tapped into, it really doesn't create much of a problem for Izuku to stack both of them on each other. So by the time that this brand new creature and being comes back, Izuku is more than ready to handle him, or so he thinks. We immediately have Izuku being informed of the Kais rushing in after informing him that one of the Kais actually died, Izuku's master. The apprentice was the only one that was able to escape, and after Izuku hears this, he is angry. He uses the Kai and returns back to that said planet, and once he arrives, the wizard looks at his Majin creature and tells him to essentially kill the brat. Deku looks at this Majin-like creature and says that he's not going to let him get away with that, as he lunges in, charging his ki up, and shoots 3 ki blasts at his direction. His foe just dodges out of the way and goes in to throw an uppercut, as Deku is sent flying into a crater, and he suddenly taps into his mystic form, lunging in and throwing a barrage of furious punches and kicks that are just causing his opponent to pretty much begin backtracking, falling back slowly, as Izuku thinks that there's no way that this dude could keep up with him at this state. Suddenly, the Majin creature smiles as Deku shoots a blast that eradicates his top half as it just regenerates, and Izuku's never seen anything like this before or been informed, so Izuku, after seeing that, is just shocked at how powerful this thing is, and Izuku's able to essentially do this thing where he pretty much just goes on to continue trying to use his mystic form, but he realizes that it's no good. He eventually gets sent back flying and gets ki blasted into a crater in a mountain, and Izuku's able to charge his god ki and mystic form together to lunge back into the Majin creature, who simply laughs and begins toying with Deku as if he was some sort of toy. He begins to brutally begin beating on Izuku, grabbing him by the neck and punching him in the stomach repeatedly, slapping him in the face over and over, and then crushing his head on the ground with his boot, telling him that he's garbage. The wizard looks back at the direction of, his Majin creature and tells him to finish it. Do your job. Kill him. Suddenly, the Majin creature points one hand at the direction of the wizard and blows him up, saying, "I didn't like being told what to do." As suddenly, we then have Izuku look up at this creature who has the same appearance to his old master, as he reveals that he actually absorbed him. And Izuku is like, no, this can't be, right? And suddenly Izuku just gets angrier and angrier and angrier, and he's finally able to do it. He taps into his beast form. Izuku lets out a roar that could be heard from planets away, a roar that could be heard to the heavens themselves. His eyes begin changing to that of a crimson, purple, pink, violet color, and Izuku looks towards the direction of this Majin creature with red eyes and white hair flowing, as his muscles bulge and his speed increase, his power output has just went sky high, and Izuku went over towards this creature and began to essentially pummel it until he eventually realized that he needs to finish the battle before things get dangerous. So he uppercuts this being up into the air and immediately begins charging a blast, a gigantic Masenko that actually ends up obliterating every single trace of this creature's being from existence, and Izuku falls onto one knee as he then slowly gets back up and roars, saying, as he just won the battle, and his his hidden Saiyan nature just comes out, right? And suddenly Izuku has a smile on his face as he then realizes that his master is gone. Champa arrives 2 weeks later and tells him not to worry, that there's these Dragon Ball things that actually exist, and Izuku says that they're real, before Champa explains of course they are, going on to wish that Kai back, saying that luckily the apprentice one survives, or else he would have been dead in his nap. And Izuku thanks Champa for all of his hard work, as Champa said, "Of course, kid. Maybe someday you could even train to become a god of destruction." Deku rubs the back of his head and is like, highly doubt it. I mean, right now I'm trying to become a great hero. I mean, wouldn't it be impossible fighting between both positions? Champa says, "Maybe, kid. But we'll see. Someday the possibility might open up. I mean, my brother trained a certain somebody Vegeta for Universe 7, so maybe it's my turn to enlist somebody like you." Deku looks towards the direction of Champa, nods, and bows before him, before suddenly Kai-Kaiing back to his planet, to his home, where he walks in and just goes, "Honey, I'm home." I don't know why, I just had to include that at the end. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be marking the ending to What If Deku Was Gohan's Reincarnation. AKA, what if Deku had all of Gohan's powers, abilities, and the Dragon Ball Z universe and My Hero Academia universe were linked, except Universe 6 is where Deku's at. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought about the scenario. Did you guys enjoy it? Did you guys hate it? Do you guys think I should, do another Dragon Ball character? Let me know down below in the comments. And without any further ado, it has been your boy Zyther. I love each and every single one of you guys, and I am out. Peace.